Hi, everybody. This is Dr. David P. Perrodin, and welcome to the Week 4 Fireside Chat for Educational Leadership 655, Pupil Services and Non-Discrimination with Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin, beginning Monday, February 10th, and concluding on Sunday, February 16th, 2025. A few things. One is the use of Chat GPT or AI in class. That's okay for a grammar tune-up, but please do not use it to create the responses to discussion questions. Just wanting to put that out there. A recap. Your SWOT assignment was due on February 8th. I will download them, print them, and grade them, and then return them within the next few days. At that time, I will also update the gradebook. The SWOT is a versatile tool aimed to convert two opportunities into strengths. Good job looking into CESA services that are currently contracted by your district. Per my observation, schools are moving rapidly toward outsourcing professional development to CESA, especially in schools with under 1,000 total student enrollment. What might that mean for PBIS or nonviolent crisis training or mental health? How will the CESA content align with district content? Collaborating with your neighboring districts for professional development and support is invaluable. This is also essential to ensure mutual aid in the event of a sentinel trauma event at your school or at one of your neighbor schools. Aim to make connections with at least two people in your neighbor schools or local agencies to help ensure you maintain a reliable contact person if or when those sites experience turnover. Is collaborating worth it if it's unlikely to sustain itself? I think that's the question from this week's Fireside Chat kind of discussion where we talk about Sauk County and the shared services and so forth. If you can make those services work, if you can collaborate, yes, it's worth it. Even if it sustains itself for a few years, you never know how long something like that will continue, but it might be able to sustain itself much longer. But is it worth it if it only kind of lasts for a couple of years? The answer is yes, because you are helping kids. Learn how your district contributed to the community health needs assessment. Again, you can look through, it'll usually have a page or two. It'll say these people or agencies contributed to this. And if you don't see your school district in that, reach back and find out, hey, like when's the next time this will be regenerated and we want our seat at the table. Happening now and impacting schools. So we have a lot going on across the country and across the state, which is impacting education. So let's talk about three of those things. The first is immigration enforcement activities. So again, understanding your district's position on that, your Board of Education policy, and making sure that you have inter-rater reliability across your buildings on what the response might be if ICE agents come to campus. As I indicated in the previous Fireside Chat, I think there's a lot of interpretation from that at the building level. And again, if this does happen, it'll be a very charged, stressful situation. The next point, Title IX. We saw Title IX pivot at the NCAA level, followed by a pivot at the federal level. I was surprised of the NCAA pivot happening extremely rapidly. This very fast policy change, right? We're not used to seeing that. So observe for any response from the WIAA and how potential changes might impact your district's athletics. Here's a lesser known one, but nonetheless very important. School doors building codes. Yes, in 2027, there'll be new international building codes for schools. And let's talk about that. So that's going to impact doors in schools, daycare centers, colleges, and universities will be required to have lockable classroom doors rather than being permitted to be lockable. So they'll be required to be lockable. The requirements apply to classrooms, offices, and other occupied rooms in the applicable use groups. In addition to the mandates of this section that were included in the previous editions, the 2027 IBC will state, quote, "The door shall be capable of being locked from inside the classroom." So let's just think about these changes with door locks and door design. There's a big immediate impact here for your 4K partner sites. So be aware of that and be talking with those sites and also with your director of buildings and grounds and then whoever is in that role at those sites. So now we're really seeing this extension into kind of your community partners. A second part, multiple code and design updates are coming out for entrance vestibules. So a lot of schools redesigned the entrances to the school buildings over the last couple of years. And now those are going to have additional requirements per building code. So they'll either be a retrofit or any new construction will have to follow these. So it's very necessary for you as a pupil services director to be aware of this. Why? Students with disabilities, access in and out of the building, being an advocate for them, and also English language learners, making sure that we're not creating systems again where to get into a building or to leave a classroom, you not only have to turn a handle or press a bar, but now you have to enter a code that's on a wall, or you have to do some other, kind of mystic sequence of things. And believe it or not, that kind of stuff was on the table. And I show some kind of spoof images here, but the reality is no one else is going to be championing that unless it's you, of saying, hey, how will students with disabilities interface with these modified door systems and entrance and exit systems? So actually the new legislation, the new International Building Codes of 2027, that's a very positive step in the right direction, because a lot of things that have been done with schools as far as entrances, as far as classrooms, barricades and so forth, that's pretty willy-nilly right now. As I tell people, if you get into a classroom and it feels like an escape room, something is wrong. Again, put yourself in the place or the perspective of a student with a disability or a 4K student or an English language learner. And the best way to test that stuff, authentic. Have them actually see if they can egress the room under the conditions that have been established. Week 4 shout-outs. Amy wrote about investigating bullying and harassment that resides on social media posts. How do you document it? What are best practices? So my response to that, you bring up a terrific point, Amy, because these things exist in cyberspace. And so are you going to take a picture of it with your phone, a school phone? Are you going to bring it up on and take a screen capture? It's hard to say how you would do that. I would, again, urge you to consult with your legal counsel on this process. And how are you going to timestamp it? What platform it was on? So keeping these accurate records, or kind of this provenance, right, of when it was established, because it can be altered too. So how are you gathering these records which really exist on these social media sites? Beth was commenting about contracting with CESA or other outside providers. She wrote, our physical therapist is contracted through the local medical hospital along with our school nurses. Unfortunately, we have hit a few snags with these employees in the past few years regarding professionalism. Any complaints regarding performance have had to go through the healthcare provider. Sadly, we found that process didn't quite align in quality with the performance reviews conducted by district staff. My response, I agree with that, right? So, meaning that if you are contracting with a third-party provider, it is essential to have a memorandum of understanding. So their expectations and your expectations are matched. And if they're not, there can be a separation of agreement there. So in my experiences, CESA is an invaluable resource for low incidence providers such as DHH, VI, O&M, physical therapy, occupational therapy. That's not always the case, right? They're not going to necessarily be able to provide you with all of those services, but typically they can do a terrific job with that, or they can find people that can work across CESAs to help you with that. Additionally, your district is relatively close to where our state providers are for Deaf, which would be Delavan, and then also Vision, Janesville, outreach services, and that could be advantageous to you if you haven't looked into that. I always felt confident contracting with CESA services, but whenever working with a hospital, an independent provider, or rehabilitation agency, I insisted on a clear memorandum of understanding. My primary reason was to ensure that I had a name and contact information of the contracted worker's supervisor. If the provider was an independent contractor, I also required proof of insurance and an at-will termination agreement. I recall one particular complex situation involving a third-party nurse paid through Medicaid who supported a student at home and in school. While the district didn't pay for the nurse's services, the arrangement was unusual. I made it clear that while the student was in school, our district RN was the primary decision maker regarding that student's care. The private nurse appeared competent, but frequently took unauthorized smoke breaks outside of the school or in the parking lot. Despite being warned by the principal that smoking was not permitted, she continued. Ultimately, I tracked down her supervisor and held a meeting to clarify expectations. Shortly after, the supervisor replaced this nurse with another nurse. From that experience onward, I never proceeded without an MOU in place. Beth also shared challenges to finding ASL, American Sign Language, staff. And I posted an article from the Eau Claire School District, an article that was written just this week, how American Sign Language, what they were doing is promoting it as, yes, this benefits students who require an ASL instructor and then also an interpreter, but there was a strong ancillary benefit to students who were English language learners.
Making sure everyone has equal opportunities to learn is a main focus of the Eau Claire Area School District, and for some that may mean extra resources.
Interpreters for students that are deaf or hard of hearing help the students in the classroom, but they aren't the only ones benefiting. WEAU's Kim Leadholm explains. Judy and Heidi, there are 5 interpreters in the Eau Claire Area School District, each helping students that are either deaf or hard of hearing in the classroom. But through those resources, other students are introduced to American Sign Language or ASL and may even be inspired by it.
All right, let's get started.
For each lesson,
she interprets in case I didn't hear.
Ava Stefanik watches 2 people.
I always need to be in a good spot so I can see the interpreter and the board too,
to make sure she captures everything that's said.
It really helps me because if I didn't hear my teacher or I missed a part or I can't hear, I could just look at the interpreter and I could see.
And these resources aren't just for Ava.
For our students who are deaf and hard of hearing, we always look at access. How can we make the classroom, the school, accessible to them, given their differences in hearing? It's really important for that communication to be there for everyone. We teach a sign class every Wednesday right there in the classroom. We take time out of our normal classroom time to teach a sign class and play games.
It's an opportunity making a difference for Ava.
I feel happy and I also feel included.
And the rest of the classroom.
At the end.
Other students can access them too. I have seen some of our lower language learners pick it up very quickly and be able to use it with friends. I've seen it with our non-readers using it to help decode. It's all encompassing.
So while Ava is learning each day, other students are also able to experience ASL.
I think it's really cool that there's a whole language through sign, and I think it's really cool that people can communicate through that even though they can't necessarily hear.
And will maybe even spark the next generation of interpreters.
I want to do something with sign. It'd be really cool to be a part of that.
Now, there is some proof having interpreters in the classroom inspires others to go into the field. Tracy, Ava's interpreter, says she was in a classroom with an interpreter when she was in 2nd grade, which made her want to follow this career.
So I think that's an interesting way to look at things, and apparently this is what they were observing. Now, part of that, though, would be funding. If you're going to fund an ASL staff person, and then also quasi use them for some benefit of ELL, you're going to have to be very clear on what your funding looks like, because you're not going to be using your flow-through funding, for example, for an ASL teacher who might then also be working with ELL students. So there's some incidental benefit there, which probably isn't an issue, but that's something you'd want to talk to your business manager about. But nonetheless, with the challenges to finding ASL staff, I think this is really a kind of innovative approach that Eau Claire's taken. And it's also authentic to pointing out that, yes, this person is having a benefit to some other students who are discovering that, right? So Stina shared that task completion is impeded by her own ADHD, and she noted that the checklist shared by a classmate might be something she personally embraces to help keep moving forward in prioritizing, right? So Stina, my response to that, I use a variety of planners, and the older I get, the more planners I use. More now than ever in my career. Something that has helped me is to create a running Google document with task and assign dates, and to use the checkbox features so you can click things off when you're done. And if I don't address something, I can just slide it forward. And sometimes it's something that might be idle for weeks, and then I'll ask myself, does this really need to be done, right? Is this a high priority? Because apparently it's gone a number of weeks. I haven't attended to it, and the world's still turning, right? So maybe it's something that goes off of the list. Actually, in doing these fireside chats, at the moment, I am looking right now at a roughed out template where I enter information as the week goes on, and I'm harvesting from class. So yeah, I think it's wonderful that you're using these, and I think as we go forward, right, it's just embedded into the ability to use our phones to take notes and voice notes and so forth. So I think it's terrific. Also, the meeting notes feature of Google Meetings, I use that often, and it helps people get information available ahead of time and then as the meeting develops. Stina also suggested that CESAs offer more training on how to write IEPs. I agree, Stina. And I propose that there should be a statewide IEP conference. Does that sound crazy? Maybe it does. I think it would be successful, and I think actually the first year you ran it, 500 people would attend. But you're right. I mean, IEPs are, to me, more art than mechanical, right? You can give a lot of examples and things like that, but I'm really kind of excited about this possibility of maybe like an IEP conference, and I kind of wrote like your CESAs then could branch off some contracted professional development from that. Corey wrote, we used to have a partnership with the area school districts when I came on board with the school district where I'm at now 12 years ago. And we had joint in-service days and professional development initiatives. That was very beneficial in our area, but went away due to different focuses and levels of implementation within the districts around us. My response, Corey, do you have any insight into why these inter-district professional development days ended? From my perspective, topics like suicide prevention and crisis response are always well suited for inter-district PD. In a crisis, schools either rely on neighboring districts for support or provide assistance themselves, so it makes sense to train together. Another universally relevant area is food allergy management. While literacy, RTI, and PBS might have a district kind of specific element or flavor, there's still plenty of content out there to justify at least one day of shared training. So my question would be, has there been any discussion about revisiting those past agendas and to see if restarting this initiative might be worthwhile? Again, a lot of things kind of ended during the pandemic. Maybe this ended a long time before that, but there's a lot of value in professional development as a collaborative effort with your neighboring districts. Looking ahead to week 4, mental health, trauma-sensitive schools seeking student input. In Moodle, we have suicide prevention resources. Address this at the beginning of the year and again mid-year. And I think the mid-year part is where people miss out. So put it on your calendar so when people come back from winter break and you're coming into second semester that you have a refresher on suicide prevention, signs of suicide, and then also who the contact people are in your district, right? Someone should be able to bring this to anybody, but just that is refreshed, especially through your counselors. DPI's Trauma Sensitive Schools online professional development is robust and it's free. CDC School Connectedness and the YRBS, we talk about those this week. Wisconsin Indian Education Association and UW-Madison's Multicultural Student Center, which has outreach. A reflective teaching annotation. Understand the capabilities and limitations of your assessment tools. The YRBS is not a mental health assessment. School staff typically are not trained or licensed to diagnose mental health conditions in children. We are in a time of disruption with OHI, 504, and long COVID, and the roles of teachers will catch up to this change. But again, going back with the YRBS, the YRBS is not a mental health assessment, and it is very diluted data. So what it will do is give you more of a forensic view on trends, okay? I'm not a big fan of some of the questions in the YRBS. Like in the last 12 months or in the last year, have you been bullied at school or something to that effect? Right? Like who can remember exactly back 12 months? What does at school mean? Is the parking lot part of school? So I think there's limitations to that. I wrote about that in School of Errors. You can get into kind of deeper why kind of the survey path is often, I think, the incorrect path to take, yet we know the YRBS is out there. It's often linked to grant funding, so enough said with that. Student-to-student relationships have become much more complicated in our time of social media. Counselors, your school resource officer, or your local district attorney should inform students of consequences of harmful relationships and posting compromising images online. Get out ahead of this. So you might invite your SRO, right, your local district attorney, your counselors, like a joint presentation with your students at different grade levels and talking through, okay, if you're posting this type of image, right, here are potential consequences and to step through that. You also want to make it where if somebody has been the recipient of images that have been posted or images that have been deepfaked, that they know who to go forward and contact and be supported in that. Because we're in an environment, right, where an image can be modified to the extent where it might not be even happening within the school district. It could be, somebody from far, far away, or even AI, which is taking these images and modifying them. So again, just having that conversation, it's something, right, that didn't exist 20 years ago, and now it's actually become pretty prevalent.
Hello, Dr. Perrodin. Thank you for making students in EDUL 655 aware of deepfakes. Have a good class.
The positive to negative ratio of 4-to-1. Live it, meaning you say 4 positive things to every negative thing. So practice it with PBIS. Observe for it. A 2017 study by Gallup found that employees who receive regular recognition are more engaged, more productive, and less likely to leave their jobs. And I think that also extends to students, right? As a school leader, one of the top things you should be giving out are compliments. The syllabus. Read Chapter 1 in School of Errors, how thinking about a bagel can get you through the worst day of your life. What does this mean for authentic experiences for students? Will the metaverse increase experiences or shrink them even more? How about the pros and cons of VR field trips? This can be very inclusive, right? So I talk with a lot of students and ask them, about their school and things that they do on the weekend. And kind of one of the things I hear a lot is I play Gorilla Tag on the weekend. So I had to look it up, and it's a VR game. So, where students are interacting more in that VR environment today, of course, because we didn't have that 20 years ago, than in the past with authentic experiences. And there can be benefits to that too, but just understanding those authentic experiences for students. Someone who says, we're going to plan a class trip this year and we're going to Washington, D.C., and you end up with everyone with a VR headset and you're walking around your gymnasium, right? So, whoa, I'm at the Washington Monument. So, nope. That is just a pole which holds up the volleyball net. So, read my article about abeyance groups that was featured in the November 2022 issue of Phi Delta Kappan. Be informed that abeyance agreements do not originate from education law and could be discriminatory practice if used to deny students services. It can also disrupt their access to due process. So there's a 14th Amendment issue there. Read the article. It's very direct. And I actually give an example from a large school district that uses these. I am opposed to abeyance agreements, and I will state that in every class. But I also understand that they are widely used in schools, and there are some arguable merits. But again, when you use an abeyance agreement, basically, so after 30 days, if the student attends school and has good behavior, whatever infraction disappears, it doesn't stay on the record, you are destroying a potential student record. And that's important to know, because over time, if there's a pattern that would have developed had these student records been there, and that pattern would have informed you to bring services into that student's life, this can be quite devastating. There can be some very, very harmful events, things that happen. And you look back at the student records, and if abeyance agreements were kind of prevalent in those districts, you're not going to find information, right? You don't report an abeyance agreement to your Board of Education, to the state, to the feds. So basically, those never existed. So it's a real murky area. I think as a director of pupil services, you need to understand abeyance agreements, which also go by pre-expulsion. You'll see a lot of different names are given, and just how they interface with the school setting. One thing for sure is, and we draw this out in the 651 class, is if that abeyance agreement, for example, is occurring before a manifestation determination, that's wrong. So that's just a process that cannot be allowed to happen. So again, read that article, understand it. I know why people do this. Oftentimes they'll have an argument if it's a second chance. We don't want this one incident to derail, a student who's had a very strong positive record of following student code of conduct. I get it, right? But there are other parts of an abeyance agreement where they just become part of standard operating procedure, and we don't know how many of these things are issued in a year. Or across multiple years, if a student has had 7, 10, 15 abeyance agreements, nobody knows. All right, everybody, you've been doing an awesome job. I will be getting those SWOT papers back to you. I grade those by hand, so I like going through those. And then keep working with your team on your allergy project for Bruce. That's kind of your next larger assignment coming up. And we are really here 2 months away from class being done. So things are moving fast. Continue to be active posters to class. I appreciate that very much. All right, everybody.